What is going on, guys? Well, the year that was 2023 is almost behind us. We have less than a week to go before it is officially 2024, and now it is time to start all of the end of the year videos. So if you guys have been watching me for a while, you know I always do the best, the worst, most surprising, most disappointing. Last year, I did a standalone video talking about all of the horror films, ranking them from worst to best, and ranking the comic book films from worst to best. And that is the video that we are doing today, is ranking all of the comic book films of 2023 from worst to best, of which I have 11 movies. There are a couple of oddballs in here that aren't traditionally what you would think were comic book movies, but are actually, in fact, an adaptation of a graphic novel, so it felt necessary to include them on this list. And it's been a weird year. It's been a weird year for blockbusters in general, but especially with comic book films. We've had the DCEU come to a very unceremonious assassination for movies that just, in varying degrees, absolutely failed. And even Marvel had a terrible year at the movies. I also want to take a moment to thank Rocket Money for sponsoring today's video, but more on them later. And as it always should go without saying, but never seems to, this is just my list. This is my ranking from my worst experiences with the comic book films of this year to my best experiences. I don't expect my list to match up with yours or anybody's. Just put your difference of opinion down in the comment section below, and we'll discuss our difference of opinion and why we liked and disliked these movies in differing degrees. With that being said, let's kick it off with number 11. To me, the least exciting, the least good experience that I had with a comic book film this year, while actually still being a decent enough movie. Number 11 is Shazam! Fury of the Gods. And I was a pretty big fan of the first Shazam. I actually should have dropped my DCEU ranking yesterday, the final ranking of that universe, if you want more in-depth thoughts on movies in that universe. But Shazam 2 was fairly low on that list because I just felt numb to pretty much everything that this movie gave me. I still like Zachary Levi's take on the character, even though his personality and the personality of the kid didn't quite match up as well in this one. There is some surface level entertainment to be had with comic book stuff, good capes, punching bad capes, and it's a visually entertaining enough movie if you just want to shut your brain off and have a decent time for an hour and 45 minutes. But I just want more from these movies. I can't really walk away and get a whole lot of value with just that experience with comic book films anymore. We have been so oversaturated with comic book properties over the last 10 years, but specifically over the last 3 years since Disney Plus and all that got into the game, and we just started having TV shows and movies just every couple of months. There's 3 or 4 different things we have to watch. The just okay experiences aren't just okay for me anymore. Like I have them and I'm like, okay, whatever, that didn't offend me, but I instantly forget your movie and I'll probably never watch it again. And that's kind of what happened with Shazam 2. Didn't care for the villains. Helen Mirren and Lucy Liu were great. Their villains did nothing for me. I didn't think that the little surprise arc with Snow White was all that much of a surprise there. Some of the things that they were exploring with his adoptive brother, his foster brother, the one with the cane, was potentially interesting, but everything that the first Shazam movie succeeded on, this one just felt like kind of a half measure of that. And this was also the first movie of the year after we had already found out that the DC universe was coming to an end. And so it just kind of felt like, why are we here? Who cares, I guess. So it's fine enough. Objectively, it's not a terrible movie. It just didn't leave any impact on me whatsoever. But really quick before we continue on with this list, if you want to be able to better manage your money so that you can afford to go and see all 250 comic book movies we're going to get over the next couple of years, please check out the sponsor of today's video, Rocket Money. If you enjoy any kind of media in today's climate, there's a chance that you have a gigantic stack of subscription services. From music subscriptions to streaming services, even nowadays we have video game subscriptions. And while I like to think that I can keep a mental note of everything that I'm paying for every month, the truth is, there's just way too many to remember. Well, today's sponsor, Rocket Money, is here to help by giving you a personal finance app that helps you monitor and cancel subscriptions, lower bills, and overall just manage your money better. The day that I activated my Rocket Money account, I found out that I had been paying for a music subscription service I thought I canceled over a year ago. Because on my online billing, the music subscription service had the same exact name as another service under the same company that I continue to use today. So every month I would just overlook that charge, not realizing I was paying for something I wasn't even using. And the best part is I didn't have to go combing through that website for a customer service number to spend 30 minutes going back and forth with bots. Talk to a representative! After just a couple of clicks, Rocket Money canceled that subscription for me. So take control of your finances today and go to rocketmoney.com/Cody Leach to get started. That's rocketmoney.com/Cody Leach to try Rocket Money out today and unlock more features with premium. And thank you to Rocket Money for sponsoring today's video. And along those same lines, number 10 for me is the Marvels. And honestly, the Marvels and Shazam 2 are pretty interchangeable for me. If I could tie them both as bottom, they would be. The Marvel was just okay. You know, it's not this offensive dumpster fire that some sections of the internet want you to think that it is. It wasn't this profound experience that's being unfairly treated like the other section of the internet wants you to think that it is. It's just an okay MCU movie. It is officially now the worst performing Marvel Cinematic Universe movie in history, and there's not really a whole lot of mystery of why. I mean, the first Captain Marvel movie made $1 billion, but it was just because of the placement of that movie in between Infinity War and Endgame. Not a very popular character or a popular portrayal of that character. Not a movie that a whole lot of people, even MCU fanatics, will tell you is great. They're like, hey, that one was good. You know, not enough to justify a lot of excitement for a sequel. And then they have the added problem of turning this into not just a Captain Marvel sequel, but also a sequel to like 4 other things, which this was the first time that really bit them in the ass, to where they want you to be able to watch all these Disney Plus shows, plus all the movies and all this other stuff. And then you got to see this movie that's a sequel to all of that. And if you don't, then it's not going to make sense. And this showed them that is not going to work, especially if your product is going to be mediocre for most of the time, because a lot of us, myself included, one of the louder critics, are not willing to do the homework anymore. If your movies and your shows are awesome, I will happily do the homework. But if they're just okay, I'm sorry. I'm not going to dump 9 hours into your fucking Disney Plus bullshit just so I can know what the significance of a couple of things in the Marvels is. So that was the biggest issue with the film. You go to see it, and it's okay. Again, surface level, there's some entertainment to be had of generic comic book stuff. Some pretty colors, some superpowered beings punching other superpowered beings. And I think that Aman Vellani is the one that saves this movie, Miss Marvel, who I have not watched her show. And so I was a bit of a handicap coming into this movie because of that, but I liked her character quite a bit. I thought she was very charming. I think that Captain Marvel as a character is more interesting in this. She's a little bit more relatable in this and isn't quite as callous as the other portrayals that she's had in Captain Marvel 1 and in Endgame. But at the same time, it feels like they skipped over a movie between Captain Marvel and the Marvels. And so a lot of her character development and her change, it feels sudden and unearned. And so we're kind of still at arm's distance with this character, even if we like her more. The villain, extremely generic. And so, it's another movie where you watch it and you go, okay, like there's things I could have used that 2 hours for better, but I don't hate myself for watching that. So that's the Marvels. Coming at number 9, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. Yet again, wash, rinse, repeat of the things that I pretty much just said, but just a little bit better. Another movie that feels like there's no point to see it because this universe is ending. We already know, public knowledge, that this was reshot and retooled 6 different ways from Sunday in the editing room, and so we don't really know exactly what type of movie this is going to be. You have some interesting exploration of brotherhood here between Aquaman and the Ocean Master, which I liked. That is the best part of this movie. The rest of it is just kind of more stuff in Aquaman, which is fine. That's kind of what we used to have as our standard for sequels. Just give me some of that, but more. But again, we're in a climate where there's so many of these movies that Aquaman 2 just becomes another one of those comic book movies. One of those, here's flashy worlds, here's superpowered being punching another superpowered being that's evil, and there's just not really much about it that makes it stand out. You know, Aquaman is such a weird and vivid world that you are oversaturated if the world of Atlantis feels like been there, done that. Main issue with the movie for me, though, is that it leaned just a bit too much into the goofiness and the humor and the silliness. Now, there's an inherent silliness with Aquaman that you kind of have to acknowledge. I felt like the first movie did a pretty good job at winking at the audience with it and not really just diving into it, no pun intended, and making that the entirety of the tone. I think that they balanced it well in the first one. Here, I felt like they focused on it a bit too much. Even Jason Momoa's performance is very non-serious. It's just Jason Momoa being himself, basically, and being kind of the carefree party guy and talking about pizza and beer while the universe and the world as we know it is hanging in the balance. And it's just like, doesn't feel like he's really taking this all that serious, nor is the movie. For me, I didn't care for that. Some people might like that direction a bit more. So again, it was fine. It was entertaining enough. If the Aquaman 2 wasn't the end of this universe and that was the end of the DCU as we know it, I might have liked it a little bit more. As my final experience with the DCEU, it felt weird and awkward and was just okay. Coming in at number 8, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. And I'm sure this might even be a hot take that this is not the bottom. This movie got eviscerated when it came out. This was kind of the first true sign like, oh shit, the MCU might be in a lot of trouble, because a lot of people did not like this movie at all. And you know, I found it to be decent enough. Again, like for the last 4 movies on this list, I could pretty much just say it's fine, it's okay, and that would sum up all of my feelings on the movie. And that's very much the case with Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. But I didn't think that it was near as bad as everybody was making it out to be. This was the one of these 4 on the bottom that had pretty much similar receptions that I was like, is it really that bad though? Like I just didn't feel like it was. There was certainly some issues here. Like the way that they colored out this universe was kind of goofy. There was some things going on with the side characters that kind of just felt like fluff. You have a very weird decision to have Kang the Conqueror, who's supposed to be our new Thanos, our new universe-defining villain, and we see him for the first time on the big screen fighting and losing to Ant-Man. Weird decision, but I think that Jonathan Majors did a great job with what he was supposed to do here, and there's a whole other bunch of drama with him now that he's been, guilty. And so I don't even know what's going to happen with Kang the Conqueror, which might, in hindsight, make this movie even worse, that what it's setting up is not even going to come to fruition, but we'll see. We only know that in the future. But what he does in this movie, I think he does really well. I love Paul Rudd, and I love him in this role, and I think that he's entertaining here. And so there was a good bit of this movie that I was more entertained by than the 3 below it. And there was a good bit of this movie that I found to be good enough that a lot of people that saw this seemed to think that this was like by a landslide, like the biggest piece of shit the MCU has ever made. And that all just felt very, very over the top to me. It felt very much like that was unearned. You could say that this is signs of trouble, and I would agree with you. You could say that this is not as good as it should be. I would agree with you. But at the time that this came out, very early on in the year of many, many failures in blockbusters and comic book films, the level of vitriol this movie got just kind of felt a bit too much for what you actually got here. So while it's not a movie that I'm not going to die on a hill for, I'm not going to die on the anthill for Ant-Man and the Quantumania, I liked it more than most people. Coming in at number 7, there's a massive gap between Ant-Man and the rest of this list. Number 7 is The Killer, the newest David Fincher movie, which is based off of a graphic novel. And, this movie was good, while at the same time being one of the bigger disappointments this year, only because I expect so much from David Fincher. And maybe that's fair, maybe it's not. I mean, when you have a track record like David Fincher, you did it to yourself being so damn good. He's one of my absolute favorite directors. I love so many of his movies. When I found out he was doing a movie based off of a Hitman graphic novel, we're going to get Michael Fassbender in there. Like, it was like, check, check, check. That is my shit. Yes, absolutely. I want to watch that now. When I finally saw the film, while it's very well made, it's very well shot. Michael Fassbender's great in the role. You definitely get a lot of those classic things that are done very well in a David Fincher production. The score by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross is awesome, as it always is with David Fincher. The story of the movie let me down, because the story of the movie is very reminiscent of many other things. The story of the movie is very borderline cliche for hitman/assassin movies. I mean, how many movies of this type have we seen where you have a contract killer that something goes wrong with a hit and now they're on the run and they have to take the fight to the agency that they work for? I mean, you could think of 4 or 5 other movies that have that same exact plot. This is just a David Fincher, more thriller version of that storyline. And again, he does well. It's executed well. It just feels like the foundation that the movie is built on, which is the story they are adapting, doesn't stand out very much amongst other things in this subgenre. And so by the end of it, it felt a little too familiar for me. And for the amount of movies that I watch now, being a full-time YouTuber, movie critic, 86 movies last year, maybe 120 by the time the calendar closes on 2023 this year, the movies that just feel like I've seen 5 or 6 of these before, those are the ones that they fail to impress me quite a bit nowadays, because I'm starved for something different and something unique. And so even if you execute it well, if it feels like something I've seen many times before, that's a big disappointment for me. And so The Killer was a bit of a disappointment overall. Number 6 is going to be Blue Beetle. And this was a movie, one of the 4 just unceremonious movies that were just thrown out as extra shit in 2023 as the DCEU comes to a close. This was the one that felt like it had the biggest uphill battle. I think most of us that are in the know as far as how the movie industry works and watching all this stuff happen, all of us pretty much knew that Blue Beetle had no chance of succeeding in the theaters. Originally, this was supposed to be an HBO Max movie. They thought it was so good, they upgraded it to a theatrical release and then decided to reboot the universe and announced that a year before they had all their movies released. And so we all knew this thing was going to bomb at the box office, but was it going to be any good? That's what all of us wanted to know. For me, it was much better than I thought it was going to be. It was genuinely entertaining. And for all the movies that I have said over the last couple of years that feel like just generic comic book movie, this one kind of has some of that, but it stands on its own much better. And so it doesn't feel like this generic chapter within a greater universe that just doesn't move the needle at all. It feels like a movie that would have been something we would have seen in the early 2000s, but I mean that as a compliment, as a movie that stands on its own, tells its own story, builds its own characters, builds its own world, and doesn't have all of this added baggage of being a part of a greater universe, even though technically it is. You'll get like a passing mention of Batman and Superman in this movie. That's about it. And beyond that, you don't have the issue of this movie having to set up 4 or 5 things for the future, plus pay off 2 or 3 things that happened earlier on. It's just able to be a Blue Beetle movie. And as a Blue Beetle movie, I loved Xolo in the role. I'm glad he's going to carry over into James Gunn's universe. I really loved the Hispanic culture and the family element that's brought into here. That's kind of the secret sauce that makes this movie stand out a lot more than I thought it was going to, is all of the different elements of his grandmother and his mother and his father and his uncle and his sister and how they all work together and how they're all a team, even though he's the only one with the superpowers. And that was so much fun, and it made it stand out, and it made it resonant for a lot of people that, want to feel represented by a movie like this. But even me, who I don't have an experience with, a Latin family, it was fun to be able to experience that through the movie. And so I had a really good time with this one. Action sequences were solid. Special effects were all solid. Susan Sarandon's villain was pretty underwhelming, but I feel like the vast majority of comic book films, that's kind of an expectation at this point that the villain's not going to stand out. So it didn't hurt the movie too much for me, but I dug it. If the DCEU was continuing on, I would look forward to a Blue Beetle 2. But now I just have to look forward to whatever version James Gunn's going to give us. And I hope he carries over more from this movie than not, because I enjoyed it. Number 5 is The Flash. And this was a weird one, because while the writing was on the wall that this was not going to be a massive success, at least it was for me. There was some people that thought Michael Keaton was going to make this $1 billion movie, and I knew better. But this was the first time that, we didn't expect much out of Shazam. We expected certain amounts of success out of The Flash. And when this thing bombed, it was like, oh, this is not going to be a good year for DC, is it? Really was a dumb decision announcing their rebooted universe before they had these movies come out. And in hindsight, a really dumb decision to not make The Flash the final movie in the continuity and use that as your bookend. But nonetheless, when The Flash came out, I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the storyline. I enjoyed the time travel aspects. I thought that the emotional side of Barry's journey to try to get more time with his mother, who was murdered when he was young, was very well done, especially the way they wrap it up in the last 10 minutes. One of the more emotional scenes that I've seen in a comic book movie this year. I thought that the action was pretty solid in it. I thought that the Michael Keaton's Batman was pretty cool to come back. A little bit of nostalgia there. I actually liked Supergirl, and Sasha Calle, I believe was the actress's name. I liked her take. I would have liked to have seen more with her if this universe was continuing on. The CGI was horrible, horrendous, unacceptable for a movie of this caliber with this amount of budget. The fact that Andy Muschietti came out and tried to justify that and say, oh, yeah, we meant for it to look that way. That was intentional. Dude, no. No. That actually almost made it worse. The fact that they didn't just say, yeah, I know, we were shackled with time. We didn't have, with all the reshoots, they didn't have enough to some logical reason of why the CGI was that bad with a movie with this amount of budget would have been fine. Trying to tell us that it was just our eyes or like we just didn't get it. No, fuck that, dude. So yeah, the CGI, the biggest thing with this movie that just across the board, I think everybody agrees was unbearably bad. Of course, you have the drama with Ezra Miller too that turned a lot of people off, which I also understand. But overall, as a movie, if you kind of shield yourself from all of the real world implications of it with Ezra Miller and the ending universe and all of that, I thought it was a really good story. And it's one of the movies in this DCEU universe that I could see myself rewatching more often than not. Number 4, Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse. And, from here on up, these are all like the top 4 are some of the best movies of the year. So I need to say that clearly because me saying Across the Spider-Verse at number 4 is certainly going to trigger some people. But I really liked Into the Spider-Verse. I'm somebody that I don't really get into animation too much anymore. I'm just one of those grumpy men, I guess, where I've gotten past the point where cartoons do much for me. But once in a while, you get some that really work for me. And the Spider-Verse movies have been that so far. Across the Spider-Verse, for the animation itself, was mind-blowing. That was where it was like, this is unlike something I've ever seen before in my life. Like the level of animation that they're putting into this and the different styles of animation, this is, no pun intended, a marvel to look at. So that was monumentally good. I thought the story here set up a lot of really interesting things that I can't wait to see paid off. Some really good emotional character arcs going on here. I thought that the action sequences that we get here were pretty cool to go through, and all the different Spider-Man, all the different multiverse stuff. Multiverse done right, which we've seen multiverse done wrong more times than not over the last number of years. For me, though, this has a part 1 problem, which is a term that I've used quite a bit over the last 2 years. And I've seen people's arguments against that. Well, this movie's about Gwen's story, and Gwen's arc comes to an end by this, and this is really about Gwen. I hear that. To me, the movie doesn't feel like this is about Gwen. It feels like that's an arc that's happening, and we come to a decent enough conclusion of what her arc is going through by the end of this. But there's so many grander things going on that's not enough of a conclusion for me for this part 1. I've seen some other people say, well, it's about Miles' choice to do his own thing and not be told who he is and what he is. Okay, cool. Again, that's the beginning of an arc that we're going to see come to fruition in the second act. Just the fact that he acknowledges he's going to do his own thing, that's not enough of a closure for one movie for me. So when I say this is a part 1 problem, this movie introduces and sets up and starts a lot of really cool and interesting things that I'm very intrigued and invested in. And then it just kind of stops. And we have to wait for part 2, which when this came out, it wasn't that big of a deal because Across the Spider-Verse, Beyond the Spider-Verse, was supposed to come out like April or May of 2024. Now it's been taken off the release slate entirely, and so we have no fucking idea when we're going to get this movie. And that's going to be a frustrating wait if it's 2025, 2026. No idea. So we've had a number of movies over the past couple of years that are a part 1 of something that lose sight of the fact that you still have to tell a complete and satisfying story within your part 1. You think of like Star Wars is the classic example. A New Hope is very much part 1 of a trilogy, but you never watch A New Hope and think, well, this can't exist on its own where there's so many things. It sets up some tail end things that go into Empire, just like Empire does. It leaves some tails off to go into Return of the Jedi. But you watch movies like that and you feel whole by the end of them. You feel like you've been told a full, conclusive story. And Across the Spider-Verse is one of a handful of movies here recently that are part 1s that I don't feel like are completely successful with that. So that was the biggest issue for me, was that I spent 2+ hours with a movie and then I walk out kind of frustrated that now I have to wait and I don't feel closure with the bit of story that I got for part 1. Coming in at number 3, what is actually my favorite animated film of the year is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem. I have been a Ninja Turtles whore my entire life. The Ninja Turtles and Power Rangers were pretty much what defined my childhood as far as like the badass heroes that I watched. And Ninja Turtles, where Power Rangers very much has not, has been something that all the way through my adulthood I've maintained my interest in, and I've wanted to see some rebooted version of it. The Michael Bay movies dropped the ball while having some potential there. And when I heard that they were going to be doing this and it was going to be animated, a bit of me was disappointed because I always prefer live action. But when I saw all the names attached, this was going to be Seth Rogen and he was going to be one of the producers and they were going to be leaning into the teenage side of things. I started seeing the voice cast and I got excited for it. And I took my girls to a press screening to check this out in Jacksonville, or not a press screening, an early preview screening in Jacksonville, which is 2 hours away. And it was every bit worth that 4-hour round trip. We had an absolute blast with it. I loved the personalities of the Turtles. I really liked the animation style. I really liked their relationship with Splinter. I think that they really leaned into the mutant side of things with all the villains that we get here, and that was really fun. It sets up a nice new rebooted universe for the Turtles where I feel like they could follow it up with movies or a TV series, which I think they plan on doing both, like Paramount Plus series and movie sequels with Shredder. And it was just a very fun, exciting thing to see as a Ninja Turtles fan, because to me, this is easily the best version of these characters that we have gotten since the first two movies back in the 90s. And it was good to be able to say that, because usually talking about Ninja Turtles in some rebooted form was just like, they tried, but here's all the list of problems. The only thing that I didn't care for with this was I felt like, I think it was Michelangelo and Donatello's voice actors felt like they should have been swapped. Like something about the flavor of their voices felt like those characters were mismatched to me, which is a minor issue, but one of the bigger issues was, as an old school Turtles fan, it felt like maybe they were leaning a little bit too far into completely going a different direction with certain classic characters, i.e. classic villains not necessarily being villains anymore. And that ruffled my feathers a bit, but I liked so much of what they were doing that I'm willing to see where they go with that. So this, I know Spiderverse fans are probably thinking I'm crazy, but this to me as a Turtles fan was the better experience. This was the one that I was more excited for. This is the one that I felt more whole walking out of, and I'm more excited for the future of. So TMNT Mutant Mayhem comes in at number 3 for me. Coming in at number 2 is going to be Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And this was the one definitive success of the MCU this year. And this was the one that needed to be a success. I've been a fan of the Guardians of the Galaxy ever since that first film. And I had no idea who the hell those characters were before that first movie is. That's still in my top 3 MCU films as far as I'm concerned, that first film. The second one is just okay, but I admit I did like it a bit more with the existence of this third one. I think the whole trilogy actually makes that middle chapter a little bit better. So in hindsight, that's another kind of notch in the belt of this movie, is that it makes a movie that I was a little iffy on better. And emotionally, this is the most devastating and just the most gripping of arguably any of the MCU movies, of which they're in the 30s now. So the whole storyline going on with Rocket Raccoon, I mean, just gut-wrenching. And so many points throughout the movie, you'll choke up, you'll get teary-eyed, you'll actually be fearful, like, oh my God, are they about to rip my heart out right now? What are they going to do? Oh my God. You'll feel that at multiple points in this movie because of how well they've developed these characters. And I think they did a phenomenal job at executing that storyline, getting the right emotions out of you without necessarily going too far with it, which James Gunn can do. His mean-spirited side can get the best of him sometimes, and I feel like he kept that in check a perfect amount for this movie. I liked how human and how emotional these characters were in this movie, and we really just dove into that for what is probably the last time we're going to see a number of them. And it was a great cap off to this trilogy. Just like with Blue Beetle, even though this is a part of the MCU, it really didn't bother itself with any of that. It just wanted to be a great final chapter of this iteration of Guardians of the Galaxy. It just wanted to be a great third chapter of a trilogy. And it succeeded for the most part with all of that. And it didn't bog itself down with setting up Kang or talking about what happened in the movies that came out last year or having random cameos. None of that. This was able to be its own thing and they need to look at the success of this movie and the failures of the other MCU movies, and I think they already have, and realize that's one of the reasons why this succeeded, is that it was able to just be a great movie with a great story and great characters, and didn't just bog itself down with being a fucking advertisement for all the other shit you're trying to do. Really good soundtrack as always. The only thing that I felt like it missed the mark with a little bit, I didn't love the villain. I felt the villain was a little bit over the top, although they do a great job at making you hate that motherfucker, so they succeed with that. And I felt like the Adam Warlock stuff was ridiculous. I didn't like anything they did with that character, but those were drops in the bucket compared to everything they did well with this. So as somebody who was a massive fan of the first film, I was very happy that they were able to close out this trilogy as successful as they were, and it gave it a very emotionally satisfying comic book film in a time where emotionally satisfying is something I don't say very often in regards to comic book films. But coming in at number 1, which unfortunately is one of the oddballs, so it's going to feel weird to be number 1 on this list, is Extraction 2. And I didn't even realize this, but the Extraction movies are in fact adaptations of graphic novels. And I did not see the first Extraction until the week that Extraction 2 came out, and I decided randomly just to throw them on, and I was like, holy shit, why did I never watch this? I'm a big action fan. I know I talk about horror a lot, but action, quite a few days of the week, might actually be my favorite genre of film. And I really enjoyed the first film. I thought Extraction 2 was even better. And the action sequences that they go for in this film are phenomenal. They're real. They're actually in camera and shot with actual helicopters and actual explosions and actual fire. And God, does that make all the difference. Chris Hemsworth is an absolute badass and does great with the stunt work and great with this character, who, you know, is not a character that has all these massive layers, but is just a good, solid, badass character for a movie like this. There's like a 21-minute one-shot, or a fabricated one-shot sequence that was just like mind-blowing to watch for the first time. It was like, holy shit, this is so cool. You know, story-wise, is it a lot to write home about? No, it's fairly simple, like some pretty great action films of the past. But, you know, as long as you do everything else right, you can forgive that. If the action was just okay and the characters were just okay, then we would really, really hate the fact that the story is more minimalist. But as long as you have badass characters and massively awesome action sequences and visceral action and cool fight scenes, and all of that can make the satisfaction level forgiving enough for being a story where it's just like, well, we're doing this again. We got to extract somebody again. And this is going to end up being one of my favorite films of the year, because action movies like this are kind of few and far between if they're not called John Wick. And that's a genre of movies that I never want to go away, and I don't get to enjoy nearly as much as I would like to. Whereas, you know, there's about 5 times as many comic book films as I would like to enjoy in a year. Action movies like this, I could take at least 3 times the amount that we get. And so the fact that we got one this year that was on the level of success that was Extraction 2 makes me super hyped for an Extraction 3, made me recommend to a ton of people, including my buddy CP. I was like, dude, you got to watch Extraction 1 and 2. And actually just like a month ago, maybe not even that, maybe like 2 weeks ago, he texted me and he was like, dude, where the fuck was I when Extraction came out in the discussion? Like, this shit's awesome. And I was like, Extraction 2 is even better, bitch. And so it's one of those movies that I've been happy to like hype people up for and talk about. And those are some of my favorite movie experiences of the year. So even though it's not what you would immediately think of when you're doing a list of comic book movies of the year, technically it is one. And technically it's my number 1 comic book movie of 2023. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, click over here for all of my 2023 release reviews, and I'm also going to put my top comic book, or my comic book movie ranking of last year for you to check out 2022's list. Please like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't see my ranking of all the horror movies of this year, as well as all the best and worst of lists that we're going to have over the next couple of weeks. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.